So I'm going to read two pieces. One appears in the collection Blue Talking Love as Saturday, which is a short story, but that piece actually has since sort of evolved and re-evolved into the first chapter of a novel that I'm working on that is tentatively titled She Woke Up with the Words in Her Mouth. So I'm going to read part of Saturday, which is the first section of the novel, and then I'll read a later section of the novel. But so I've had the chance to engage with some of you. I'm seeing some familiar faces. I've had the chance to engage with some students here at SUNY Oneonta. And it's been exciting to talk about how voice and language kind of animates and motivates my work. And as Dr. Hovis just mentioned, certainly for me, Blue Talking Love is definitely an enterprise of sort of thinking about magic and realism, magical realism, multiple sort of modes of voicing, music, poetry, and that sort of cross-genre thinking is something that definitely motivates a lot of my writing. So the two pieces that I'm going to read, I think, are also deeply invested, especially in thinking about voice. Although they're both in a kind of third-person, closely limited perspective, I hope that we'll be able to kind of talk a little bit about sort of what's going on with voice in each of these sections that I'm going to read. So the novel follows a character named Malaya Clondon from the time she's a 140-pound 8-year-old girl to when she grows to be a roughly 500-pound teenager. It's set in Harlem, and the story really, the novel really sort of thinks about how her body, this kind of big black woman's body, represents many struggles, not only around embodiment, but around race and class and gender in her family, and intergenerational struggles that also play out on the landscape of Harlem. So again, I'll read a short part of the first section, and then we'll skip forward where the voice sort of accesses her interiority as a teenager. The truth was, Malaya Clondon had been thinking about French fries since last night, as she ate Chinese food in secret with her father while her mother worked late at the university. The thought of French fries stayed with the 8-year-old through the canned laughter and blonde-headed family tableaus of the Friday night sitcom lineup each week, and helped her push herself from bed most Saturday mornings. She thought of the shiny fried strips nestled together, boasting countless shades of yellow and gold from the time she cleared the front steps of the family's brownstone each Saturday morning until she felt at last the film of hot grease on her face after African dance class, so much later in the day. On the walk to the meeting, other foods drifted to mind. Malaya and her mother passed at least 8 bodegas on the walk, plus the McDonald's, the Kentucky Fried, and the Woolworths on Broadway, where the smell of hot popcorn seeped in slow waves from beneath the glass doors. On 145th Street, there was Copeland's Restaurant and Reliable Cafeteria, where they made crispy smothered chicken with gravy as thick as pudding, and potato salad that was perfectly sweet and salty at once. But by the time the Clondon women pushed through the heavy green doors of the AME Mount Canaan Church and went down to the basement community center, by the time Malaya took her turn on the scale and watched red numbers blink and multiply beneath her, feeling her mother's eyes fixed on the number panel from behind, Malaya thought only of the potato and ketchup crunch-crusted mush she would have just before art class, how good it would make her feel. She did not think of the hour of dance class she would have to get through beforehand, or what lies she would tell about how her allowance had been spent. Well, don't everybody speak up at once now, Miss Adelaide, the meeting leader, laughed over the collar of her lavender suit. Malaya watched the woman walk to the front of a room full of fat women on folding chairs. Miss Adelaide caressed the plastic easel, flipping back a page marked Emotional Triggers Pie Chart, and exposing a sheet as clean and white as the face of a new tub of Cool Whip. She stood there, her hips sloped prettily out before her, her arms loose and easy along her waist. Come on, ladies, don't be shy. Miss Adelaide shifted into another breathtakingly casual pose, resting her weight on one tall, plum-colored high heel and letting a hand float up to stroke the paper. I want you to think about your favorite food. You know we all have that one food that always gets us in trouble. I want you to think about it. Call it out. Malaya listened, catching a few coughs, small squeakings of the metal seats. The rustling of a paper bag somewhere in the back of the room brought salt water to Malaya's mouth as the thought of removing fries from their paper, as she thought of removing fries from their paper bag. She imagined the brown, orange, and yellow strips bending over one another in the red and white striped dish, a shower of salt crystals hitting them from all sides and sparkling on them like glitter. All right now, I know it can be embarrassing. Miss Adelaide leaned back, posed, then moved slowly toward Malaya and her mother, who was sitting a seat away to leave room for both their hips. Malaya thought nothing of the first steps, except how nice it was the way the tapping of the woman's heels against the floor seemed to punctuate the soft rub of the shimmery pantyhose. Shh, shh. But within seconds, Malaya could smell the woman's perfume in her face and found herself staring directly at the silver buckle on her purple suede belt. Fear frothed up in Malaya's chest as the synthetic cherry stink of Miss Adelaide's uncapped marker prickled the insides of her nostrils. She would lie, she decided. She would disclose a passion for yogurt, welcome and unusual in a girl of 8. Her face puffed with earnestness, she would tell the woman that she was centered, committed, and in control, that she'd take fat-free frozen yogurt over cookie dough ice cream any day. She would make her mother proud and make this lean purple creature go back and check her scale. Those red numbers could not be right. This girl could not weigh 156 pounds committed as she is. It was her specialty, this kind of lying. It was how she helped other children pronounce her name, Malaya, like I don't tell the truth. She parted her lips, prepared to declare her fidelity to the program. Miss Adelaide's lips were plump, and her red lipstick looked like jelly sliding over her lip line into her deep brown skin. She tugged at the empty chair between Malaya and her mother, gently easing it from between the Condon women's hips. I'm sorry, baby, she cooed. Did you want to say something? Malaya paused, wondering if her lies were worth telling now that it was clear she wasn't being asked to give up more than an empty chair. She shook her head no. Her mother looked over at the empty space where the chair had been and gave Miss Adelaide a stiff half-smile. Malaya knew this smile. It was the Professor Condon smile, the small talk of her mother's facial lexicon, used to assert her presence and make vague reference to Malaya as if to say, sighingly, yes, that's my daughter. Her mother did have real smiles, of course. Malaya had seen them, bright and wide as egg yolks, before the family moved to Harlem, when she, her mother, and her father used to spend their Saturday mornings adventuring in Central Park. But these smiles, these public smiles, were a matter of etiquette for Naila Condon, like knowing what shoes to wear with a winter white suit with black buttons, or how to deadhead flowers without compromising the symmetry of a bouquet. Miss Adelaide smiled back. Well, everyone is so shy this morning. She pushed the chair to the center of the room and glided into it like a goose into a familiar pond. So I'll tell you all first. Mine was corn with butter. Anytime there was corn around, I knew I would not be able to control myself. I used to be a corn junkie. A few ladies along the wall chuckled. And I don't mean just a little pat, she continued. I'm talking about butter, okay? At this, Miss Adelaide changed shape before Malaya's eyes. She uncrossed her legs, hunched over, filled her cheeks with air, and made smacking noises as she ran her fingers back and forth in front of her mouth, mimicking a wet and unsightly battle with an ear of corn on the cob. The room roared. Fat ladies shifted massive thighs in their chairs. Thick ladies clapped their hands and crashed against each other like waves. And let me tell you something, Miss Adelaide said, leaning forward and pointing a finger at the group in a gesture of sister-girl confidence. I know I'm not the only one. The whole room laughed, and one rotund woman in the middle of the metal chair seat leaned her head back and opened her mouth so wide that Malaya thought she might freeze in that pose, turn to stone, and begin to spout water like a fish in a fountain. Then the meeting leader returned to herself just like that, left leg draped over right, shoulders straight, manicured hands with their red-tipped nails resting so coolly on her lap that one might not know she briefly turned into a natural disaster just moments before. Well, the huge woman said from the fourth or fifth row, I do have a weakness for pasta. I heard that, someone shouted. What kind? And they were off, talking about food. Malaya didn't listen, except when her mother murmured in testimony as the women mentioned foods that she herself liked, like oxtails and pistachio ice cream. As food names began to appear on the easel's blank page, Malaya imagined each food rising from a plate before the woman who had claimed it as her trigger. Pieces of lasagna and tall styrofoam-cupped milkshakes with cartoon eyes and gloved hands cuffed these women to their chairs in Malaya's imagination, dancing and singing devilishly as they leapt down the women's throats. The women, helpless victims, dragged themselves sadly to these meetings each week as their only hope. Quietly in her mind, Malaya considered what this trigger food might be for her. But each food she thought of suddenly lost its appeal among these women who seemed to feel guilty for putting too much gravy on their grits. The dulce de coco candies she ate on the school bus with Shanice Guzman, the little yellow-skinned girl from Amsterdam Avenue, and the chocolate chip cookies as big as her face that she bought every day at school with money stolen from her mother's pocket seemed unfathomable here. Malaya planned to eat her fries and enjoy them as soon as she could leave these women's sight. She would not ruin that moment by thinking of it now. She let her mind float instead to thoughts of the fourth grader Dondre Harris, who was the only good reason she could think of for coming here every Saturday, or for trying to stay on program at all. Each week as she waited for the numbers on the scale to stop climbing beneath her, she thought of Dondre and how much closer she might be to becoming Amandra Wilson, his pretty, skinny girlfriend, who had a face the color of sawdust and long hair that curled like lo mein. Malaya had lost 2 pounds a year ago when the family had just moved to Harlem. She was in the 2nd grade then and had beamed all week, convinced that it was the beginning of a new life for her. She told Shanice and marked it in her Hello Kitty diary, along with the news that Dondre had noticed her weight loss and asked her to be his girl, which was a lie. She had even given Ma Mare, her grandmother, the good news in a letter she wrote and mailed to Philadelphia all by herself. She gained 4 pounds the following week, but the letter had already arrived. My daughter and I like pie. Her mother's hand fell into her lap once the sentence was out. Malaya felt a force field of eyes on her. I don't keep anything like that in the house, of course, she continued. And when we go out, I try not to order dessert. But sometimes, on the weekends, I'll order an apple pie. Malaya anticipated the fancy syllables she knew would come next. A la mode. I try not to eat all the filling, her mother went on. My favorite part is the crust. My daughter likes the filling, so if I do have a craving, rather than deprive myself, I always suggest we share. The room emitted a wave of supportive mm-hms. But children, they want their own. I usually don't let her order anything, but once we've eaten that pie, we're out of control. We're off program for the rest of the weekend, sometimes the whole week. Miss Adelaide added pie to the list, which had grown to cover the entire page, leaving only a tiny diagonal of space on the left-hand side between salmon cakes and plantain chips for the 3 letters of the Clondon women's apparent trigger. Malaya wished to liquefy and slide from her seat, find herself gone from the basement into that word, pie, curled into the lower nook of the E as though it were a shaded ground beneath an apple tree. She wished for spots of sun to heat her sandaled feet as the leaves of her E-tree rustled, and for the cool of an afternoon to raise goosebumps along her legs. In truth, Malaya was not so compelled by pie. She would eat the filling because it was there, and because it would be the only chance she'd have all week to indulge herself in plain view, right beside her mother. It was true that Malaya would try to order her own. Before they ordered drinks, Malaya had usually taken a swim through the dessert menu, gliding through worlds of chocolate filling and raspberry syrups, wading in toffee and tapioca, back-floating in bowls of custard and cream. After her mother had ordered, Malaya would close her eyes and put all her energy into wishing for a dessert of her own. Almost always, though, when the waiter stooped down toward Malaya and said, "And for you, young lady?" her mother would look up and say simply and clearly, "No, thank you, we'll share." She would offer her grammatical smile and instruct him to bring a second spoon instead. Malaya would eat the filling because it was better than nothing, and because she knew her mother would feel better if she herself ate only the crust. What her mother did not know, what could not be written on Miss Adelaide's board for lack of space and limitations of language, was that Malaya would have preferred an endless plate of potatoes over pie without question. Mashed, salted, swaddled in gravy or butter or both, and served in a bottomless mixing bowl, that was how Malaya wanted to eat. She rarely had the chance. Even when her mother and father weren't there to watch her, Giselle, the babysitter, usually was. But Malaya found her ways, sneaking single-serving bags of dry cereal from the kitchen in the sleeve of her nightgown, and volunteering to dispose of leftover lunches for her friends. And by now, at 8 years old, Malaya had noticed in herself a tendency to choose quantity over quality, pools and pools of potatoes over a shared slice of fancy pie. She had not yet learned of words like abundance or profusion or glut. The only word she could find to describe her true trigger was more. Of all the women in the room, 30 at least, Only two seemed to share her passion. The loud woman who had broken the silence would now seem like ages ago, and a smaller woman in the corner who raised her hand only inches above her shoulder and said, almost in a whisper, "I have trouble with plain white rice."